Welcome to Graceland Cemetery in Chicago, Illinois. We're just a little bit north of downtown in Wrigleyville, and this is one of the most historic and beautiful cemeteries in the city of Chicago. Today, I'll give you a personal tour and show you the final resting places of many famous and notable people in this cemetery. Let's go check it out. Now, this is Graceland's historic chapel, and it was built in 1888 by a company called Halliburtt and Roche, and it was constructed out of quarried Midwestern red granite. Now, here's a look at what it looked like in the late 1800s. As you can see, not much has changed. Now, we'll step in here and you guys can see this beautiful chapel, but there's little to no doubt that many of the famous and infamous people buried in this cemetery have probably had their services in this building. And you can also scan this right here so you can figure out where people are buried in this cemetery if you're curious. And there's also business cards here and maps to help you find your way around, because this is a very, very large cemetery. And like I said, it is one of the most interesting and historic cemeteries in the Chicago area. And we'll visit all those graves in just a little bit, but I wanted to show you guys this chapel mainly because it's interesting, and the other part is because I've never seen this actually be shown in a video before. Now, there are not very many photos of this chapel in the 1800s or in the late 1800s, but here is one of the other ones that I did find. It's always kind of interesting to see kind of a before and after. So we'll head back outside and I'll show you a couple other things. Now, this down here looks like it might have been a receiving vault at one point, or a mausoleum that was just never finished. It's kind of hard to tell, but it is creepy, and you know, I really don't want to get bit by any kind of animals or get jumped by a raccoon or anything like that, so I'm probably going to stay up at the top of the stairs, but I wanted to show it to you because I find it interesting. Now, the first location we're going to check out, this is called Eternal Silence, and this is a sculpture that was done in 1909 by an artist named Laredo Taft, and this is to commemorate the grave of a man named Dexter Graves, and in 1831, he led a group of 13 families from Ohio to settle in Chicago. Dexter Graves died in 1844, 75 years before the statue's creation and 16 years before Graceland Cemetery was founded. Now, his body was presumably relocated from his original resting place at the Old City Cemetery. Now, this is also one of the city's most legendary haunted legends and lore. It's said that if you look at the eyes of this, that you can actually see how you're going to die. And it's also said that this is the inspiration for the blue ghost on the Ouija board. This is William LeBaron Jenney. He was an architect and an engineer known for building the first skyscraper in 1884. He joined the Union Army as an engineer in the Civil War, and he designed fortifications for Generals Sherman and Grant. In Chicago, he designed the Ludington Building and the Manhattan Building, both built in 1891, and are National Historic Landmarks. Jenney is best known for designing the 10-story home insurance building in Chicago. The building was the first fully metal-framed building and is considered the first skyscraper. It was built from 1884 to 1885 and enlarged by adding 2 stories in 1891. It was demolished in 1931. He passed away in Los Angeles, California on June 15, 1907. And here's the final resting place of boxing legend Jack Johnson. Jack Johnson was born March 31st, 1878 in Galveston, Texas, and he was nicknamed the Galveston Giant. He was one of the best boxers of his time, and he also became the first black heavyweight boxing champion from 1908 to 1915. His fight in 1910 against James J. Jeffries was dubbed the fight of the century. Johnson was one of the most influential boxers of all time, and he earned considerable sums of money endorsing various products, including medicines. He had several expensive hobbies such as automobile racing and tailored clothing, as well as purchasing jewelry and furs for his wives. On June 10, 1946, Johnson and a friend visited a segregated diner. When the diner refused to serve him, Johnson drove away angry with his friend in the passenger seat. The car collided with a telephone pole on U.S. Highway 1 near Franklinton, North Carolina. While his friend survived the crash, Johnson suffered fatal injuries and died later that day. He was 68 years old. And here's a look at one of the many beautiful memorials here in this cemetery. Over here is the final resting place of John Kinsey. John Kinsey was a fur trader from Quebec who was first operated in Detroit in what became the Northwest Territory of the United States. In 1802, Kinsey moved with his wife and child to Chicago, where they were among the first permanent non-indigenous settlers. Kinsey Street in Chicago is also named after him. In 1812, Kinsey murdered Jean Lalime, who worked as an interpreter at Fort Dearborn in Chicago. This was also known as the first murder in Chicago. During the War of 1812, Kinsey was accused of treason by the British and imprisoned on a ship for transport to Great Britain. After escaping, he returned to the American territory, settling again in Chicago by 1816. He lived there the rest of his years until his passing in 1828. Just over here rests Victor Lawson. Victor Lawson was born in Chicago to a Norwegian immigrant laborer who prospered in real estate. He became publisher of the Chicago Daily News, and over 29 years, Lawson's newspaper business innovations included advancements in promotion, classified advertising, syndication of news stories, serials, and comics. Laredo Taft's 1931 Crusader stands guard over his unmarked grave here. Over the years, Lawson was known for anonymously contributing to many charities which benefited a lot of people in the Chicago area. Now, even though his grave is unmarked, it is marked with the phrase, "Above all things, truth beareth away the victory." But this is the Laredo Taft statue that stands guard over Victor Lawson's unmarked grave. Now let's just take a quick pause so I can tell you guys that this is right in the middle of the city. There is a train track on one side, and there are busy streets on all the other sides of this cemetery. It is right in the heart of Wrigleyville, but it is well worth the visit. This is John Wellsborne Root. He was an American architect who was born in 1891 in Lumpkin, Georgia, but moved to Chicago and teamed up with Daniel Burnham, with whom he formed the firm of Burnham and Root, where they partnered for 18 years. He was one of the founders of the Chicago school style. Root developed the floating raft system of interlaced steel beams to create a foundation for tall buildings that would not sink in Chicago's marshy soil. Root's first use of this revolutionary system was for the Montauk Building in 1882. The work from his prime years has been recognized for significance by being designated as National Historic Landmarks, National Register of Historic Places, and Chicago Landmarks, and it also includes the famous Rookery Building. He worked on the plan for the World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago. Before it was constructed, Root died of pneumonia in 1891 at the age of 41. Over here we have George Pullman. He was an industrialist and an engineer, and he was known for luxury rail cars. Pullman made his original fortune by raising buildings. His system of using groups of men with jacks elevated buildings so smoothly that businesses could continue to operate during this procedure. Pullman then invested in his Pullman rail car empire, culminating in the creation of the town bearing the Pullman name. At his death, he was known for refusing to negotiate with unions, and his family feared desecration of this grave here. His Graceland tomb was built with steel-reinforced concrete. After Pullman's passing, the Pullman Company merged in 1930 with Standard Steel Car Company to become Pullman Standard, which built its last car for Amtrak in 1982. Now that's going to do it for part 1 of the Graceland Famous Graves Tour. Be sure to join us for part 2, and there will be a part 3 and a part 4, as well as at the end we're going to do the entire full cemetery tour. But thanks for joining us today, and have a great day.